Hello, good people! Mighty Mordugal here, the miniature minstrel, your friendly gnome bard. Okay, so we've created all of the dwarves, all the 7 houses of the dwarves, and now what we want to do is we want to create the other 2 inhabitants of this realm of Arda under the stars. Now, as I mentioned in the previous kind of setup video to this, Arda Under the Stars is a time in the First Age when essentially elves have more or less recently awoken. We're talking about, in potentially span of hundreds of years or thousands of years. But the idea is that the dwarves awoke shortly after the elves, and that many of the elves then left Middle-earth and traveled west with some of the Valar who brought them, specifically Orome, the hunter of the Valar, who brought them basically from Middle-earth to Valinor. Now, there were a lot of elves that were left behind, though, and they created their own kingdoms in Middle-earth, and probably the most prominent of those, at least initially, and certainly the oldest of those, I think, kingdoms, what would eventually sort of be considered the Avari, or those elves that were unwilling to go into the west and remained in Middle-earth, is the kingdom of Doriath, with the capital city of Morgoth, right? And this particular group of elves is particularly unique and interesting and famous in the Tolkien lore because, unlike pretty much any other of the races in Middle-earth, or factions in Middle-earth, the Sindar elves of Doriath, as they're called, or the Grey Elves of Doriath, their ruler, who is known as Elwë Singolo, or Elu Thingol, are his names. He went originally as an ambassador of the Elves of Middle-earth, with 2 others, to Valinor, where he met basically these demigods, the Valar, and was one of the few elves of his people that actually saw the Blessed Realm. And he came back, gathered a bunch of his people together, and then started to travel. However, he lingered in Middle-earth, and the reason that he lingered is because he sort of got distracted. And he got distracted because he was wandering in the woods as his people were sort of migrating slowly westward, and ran into being known as Melia. And Melia was a Maia. Now, the Maia are sort of divine servants, if you will, of the Valar. Remember, the Valar are these demigods, right? So we're talking about divine beings here. And so Melia the Maia, which is the Maia being this sort of caste of divine helpers for the Valar, she's a magical being, and basically entrances Thingol in the woods. And they end up falling in love, a long story short, and they together establish what will become the Kingdom of Doriath in Middle-earth. It'll be one of the most powerful elven kingdoms in the First Age, also known as the Hidden Kingdom. And there's a couple of hidden kingdoms, but in this case, it's a kingdom that's made famous because one of its rulers is actually essentially a demigod. And Melian, the Maia, who is associated with Yavanna, who was the Valar that she served, who was the sort of goddess of nature, if you will. Melian was very much into nature and earth and growing things, and she's very magically attuned. And so what she does to help protect the Kingdom of Doriath is she weaves what is called the Girdle of Melian, all about the Kingdom of Doriath. And so think about this as a sort of magical force field that both conceals and prevents sort of people from entering the Kingdom of Doriath. And And so this is a really kind of unique sort of faction among Tolkien's peoples because it's sort of jointly led or ruled by an ancient elf and also a divine being who wed and ultimately have a daughter whose line will lead eventually thousands of years later all the way to Aragorn, made famous in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. We're not going to get into the lore there. If you want to see some really great lore on Melian the Maia and the Kingdom of Doriath, again, I recommend the YouTube channel Men of the West. He does some fantastic lore videos. You can go and dig into it. But the idea is we wanted to create a faction that the dwarves could interact with, which was present when they were sort of forming their kingdoms. That was one of the most powerful elven kingdoms in the sort of Arda under the stars period of Middle Earth in that first age. So we've chosen Melian the Maia and her Sindarin elves. So, where is she? There she is. Melian the Maia. As you can see, I've made her very tall, very kind of imposing, but also beautiful. The idea being that she is this sort of, with these themes of green and gold. She is a sort of a daughter of nature, if you will, but a powerful spellcaster. But she leads elves, even though she herself is actually a magical sort of demigod. And so we gave the faction Keen-Sighted, naturally a natural choice, because it was said that Melian sort of had sort of foresight and was able to sort of kind of predict the future, if you will, or sort of see how things might play out, and often advised Thingol whether something he was doing was right or wrong or would have implications. But anyways, this and then elves are just known as being keen-sighted, and so these are particularly ancient elves, very powerful. So the accuracy and damage of their ranged and magic attacks is going to be better. They're also elusive. Going with the hidden kingdom of Doriath that is kind of sort of it exists in Menegroth, which are a series of caves, but it's like, don't think like dirty nasty cave, think like beautiful sort of. If you have watched the Hobbit trilogies, if you think about the Elves of Mirkwood and what their kingdom, their fortress looked like inside the caves, that's sort of kind of the idea. So anyways, we gave them elusive because they were very, the idea being they're very good at sort of moving hidden through the forested lands and hiding in sort of this hidden kingdom. So they're going to get defense and resistance against retaliation attacks and opportunity attacks. Gave them high culture, I think a natural choice here for the look that we wanted, the classic sort of elven look here. They are going to get a lot of stability and knowledge income as part of their specialties. Their sort of order affinity, of course, which will affect their tome selections, just like other affinities. And they also have this awakened ability, which I think kind of this idea that they're sort of ancient beings and kind of tied with nature, and sort of the idea that Melian can awaken the spirits of these elves to do great deeds, sort of thing. And then, depending on which direction they go in terms of alignment, they also will get bonuses. So if they go pure good, which they probably will, based on the traits and such I've given them, they'll be more powerful. So we've given them devotees of good. Again, they fought the Long War against Morgoth, or Melkor, the Dark Lord. So the bad Vala, the evil Vala, who ultimately corrupts, if you will, Sauron, and makes him one of his servants, who eventually, of course, Sauron goes on to be the big bad, but we're way before that. We're early on in Middle-earth, so we wanted the period in time when the Elves of Doriath are sort of waging a long war against Morgoth. Mana channelers, powerful spellcasters. I think this is very reflective of the idea of Melian's magical powers and her ability to kind of weave this this girdle of Melian that protects the kingdom of Doriath.
Choose your first.
Went with Tome of the Glades, attunement with nature. You know, so this idea that, like, you know, plants and everything are at their sort of kind of call, and you know, they're very, very good healing magic and that sort of thing. The idea of a vine prison, right? That just like the girdle of Melian, like you can magically kind of fence something with the sort of power of nature. And in this case, we went with a Wizard King. Because I thought it was more appropriate, because she is indeed a Maia. She is a demigod. And so I wanted her to sort of, you know, have that additional combat power in casting and more mana, and this ability to overchannel where she can cast more spells, because she is very much kind of considered to be kind of one of the great magic wielders, if you will, of Middle-earth. This, even though the Tolkien's magic system is a very kind of soft magic system, and you know, she much like Galadriel, whom actually she tutors, by the way, for those that aren't familiar with it. Galadriel actually spent some time learning a lot of her abilities from Melian, as she lives in Doriath for a time. Anyway, so here's the theme. Nice greens, that silver kind of, you know, idea of we're not yet at the pinnacle of like the Nuldoran elves with the bright gold armor and everything. It's sort of still a little earlier in the history timeline. Okay. So we have Melian the Maia, the Sindar of Doriath. Yep. And then of course we got to have our big bad, right? We got to have the big bad. So for our final ruler, we had to create none other than Melkor, called Morgoth by the elves, the Dark Lord. So with Morgoth,
what is your people's
we gave
form?
his faction basically the orc form. So it's the idea being that he, you know, he basically breeds the orcs, or sort of creates the first orcs, basically by corrupting elves. They're strong, a lot of damage, and they're ferocious. Which means that really, really tough to elude these guys once you're in combat with them, because they're going to do extra damage against you for retaliation or opportunity attacks if you try and bypass them. The natural choice, of course, for these guys was dark culture, which is the shadow affinity. And so we've talked a little bit about that one already with the petty dwarves, so I won't go into too much detail. Society traits, we wanted prolific swarmers. Again, this idea of like the hordes and masses of orcs, which is described sort of often in the Tolkien Legendarium. This idea of like, you know, endless numbers of these servants of Morgoth. Scions of evil, naturally, they're bad. Enough said.
Choose your first.
We chose Tome of Horde to accentuate this idea of the sort of, you know, this massive mob of kind of evil, sort of corrupted beings in the orcs. So it's going to give them a number of different spells that kind of make them stronger in combat, you know, do more damage, and just generally produce more units.
What is your ruler's
in this case,
origin?
we again chose to go with a Wizard King instead of a champion, because
Reveal yourself.
with champions, they can only come from the race from which they are actually going to lead. But for the Wizard Kings, they can lead any race, regardless of what their own form is. And so, yeah, so visually, I don't know, I think I did a decent job with kind of evoking the idea of this mighty sort of demigod Dark Lord, as is described in Tolkien's Silmarillion. You know, went with orange and black, natural colors, lots of spiky stuff. I mean, you can see where Sauron gets it, right? Like father, like son, basically. And then, yeah, so we'll finalize this. Okay, so now we've got all of our factions, right? We've got the realm set up. It's the Kingdom of Arda. We've got our 7 dwarven factions. We're going to try and unite those factions. That's the idea behind this game, or this particular session. We're going to try and unite the dwarves in the first age. We've got a potential ally in Melian, or a potential enemy, because the dwarves do fight the elves, as many are probably aware if you're into Tolkien lore. And then, of course, you got the big bad, who everybody is, I'm sure, going to fight. Game flow, we're doing normal. We're going to do, actually, for game speed, we're going to do fast, because we just got a ton of factions here, and I really want to get into the action for you guys. So this will, the game speed is going to affect how fast things are researched. It's going to affect population growth, and it's going to affect city structure costs. Starting conditions will be normal, the world threat will be normal, and all of the victories will apply.